All right, 10:16. I'm going to be time cop.
10:16. Let's do it. Time friend, I think you mean. And Tanisha says we can share the slides afterwards. All right. Excellent. Well, thanks, everybody. Hello. Rebecca, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi. I'm Rebecca Fanning. For those of you who joined a little after we shared geographic location, I'm in Washington, D.C. I am the Director of User Experience at Phase 2. I've been with Phase 2 for almost 3 years now, during which time I've had the extreme honor of leading our stellar team of digital strategists, accessibility specialists, and designers, whose mission it is to create useful, intuitive, and engaging experiences that deliver impact. Most recently at Phase 2, I've been working with Northwell Health, a large healthcare system in the New York City region, to merge business objectives and creative user-centered solutions to transform the patient and provider experience.
Right on. I'm Jordan Hirsch, Director of Innovation at Phase 2, and I've been here for about 7 years. And in that time, I've had the honor of working with some of the world's most impactful organizations in media, in retail, in government, and nonprofit sector. It's always an interesting challenge, no matter what vertical the clients are in, and even working within Phase 2 itself to help us develop and bring to market new capabilities. I mostly help facilitate strategic change for our clients, so I help keep them focused on what's really important while they're going through changes, and help them keep in mind kind of the human side of their strategies that they're implementing. I'm also an improviser and a musician, and I bring a lot of those parts of my brain to work with me as well.
Awesome. So want to just tell you a little bit about Phase 2. Phase 2's mission is to create digital experience that advance the human experience. We're an agency, 150 plus person agency of experts in the complete sort of soup to nuts digital experience. Our team provides services including research and insights, strategy and design, as well as intensive engineering expertise for building digital platforms. So with a little background on us, let's just jump right into the core of the session.
Yeah, welcome to the P word, managing the people in your project. I'm going to start with a little story. Once upon a time, we were working with a global wellness brand who shall remain unnamed. And we were doing a lot of different work streams with them, and one of which was that they had 2 CRM relationship management, and part of their overarching goal for all of our work streams was to simplify their tech stack and simplify the management of their tools. So we embarked on a project to move them from 2 CRMs down to 1 CRM. All right, simple. So far, so good. We did a lot of prep work, did a lot of field mapping and looking at data and who uses what and which team was going to use which tool. And we made our recommendations, and we were all set to begin this merge down to 1 CRM system. And at the last second, they canceled it. They got spooked. And they decided to stick with 2, even though it was in direct opposition to their stated goals of simplifying their tech stack. We were kind of bewildered at the time, so we did a little digging, and we learned that a couple years back, some people on this team had a new email campaign management system sort of forced upon them. Nobody really asked for their requirements. Nobody really managed their change, the transition from the old system to the new one. And it left them feeling very resistant to new technologies. So they got spooked because of this. So now they have a technology problem that they're living with. But of course, really, they have a people problem. Yeah. Rebecca.
So what we found time and time again in client experiences like the one Jordan just outlined is that it's always a people problem or at the heart of things. And that's because all projects, no matter how big or small, are about change. And we as humans are, fundamentally wired to be resistant to change. Our brains seek out patterns because patterns give us safety. And when you break those patterns, you start to, evoke, feelings of fear, of insecurity, of the unknown. Nevertheless, we have projects, right? We have engagements, we have goals to meet that, will result in change, and we need to manage that change to be successful. We need to come up with new ways of working together, new ways of measuring success, new tools, technology, workflows. And that change associated with those needs to be managed and communicated. You know, I had the ability to sit in on many of the talks yesterday, which were fabulous. And a lot of them center around technology and about understanding your customers. And, you know, Jordan and I are here to say that, you know, all the technology in the world, as shown by his story, won't help you if you don't bring your teams or your clients along with you on the journey, the transformation you're trying to make.
So we're going to talk to you about some tools and some skills that you can use that will help you lead your teams through successful projects, right? Even if you're not the one in charge, and even if your definition of team might be internal people, it might be a client, it might be a whole disparate crew. Help you understand who's actually going to be impacted by your work and how to communicate effectively with them to manage that impact, and help you enroll diverse stakeholders and build allies for your work to ensure the success of your projects. We're talking about this, by the way, not just because it helps you be successful in projects, but because there's actually a real monetary value to investing in the people side of things, right? There has been a strong correlation shown between companies that invest in their employee experience and how people deal with change internally and providing a good experience for the people doing the work. Strong correlation between that and customer experience that they end up providing for their customers. So there's a definite relationship between how we treat ourselves and how we treat our customers. And people who are resistant to change and going through a real tough time internally at work are not going to be able to do as good a job for their customers. That will translate through. So there's a real payoff, we believe, to doing this kind of work and to managing this kind of change on your projects.
Awesome. So what we'd like you guys to do right now is to take a minute or two of time and think about a time when you had a stakeholder problem on a project. Now, it doesn't have to be as big as the one Jordan just, you know, outlined to sort of blow things up at the end. But take a few minutes, write it down if you want. And we're going to ask, I would say, 2 to 3 of you, if you're interested, to please share your story. Again, remove client names. It's sort of a Chatham House rules. I suppose people in sort of England will understand that. But in essence, like, this is a safe space. But, you know, definitely, please take a few minutes, think about a challenge with stakeholders in a current project. And if we could get a few of you to share that, that would be awesome.
Yeah. And just in case people don't know, to share, you're going to click the share audio and video button, and that will add you to the queue. And then we can hit a button on our end that'll enable your audio and video for everybody, so you can share your story. It feels good to share. Get it off your chest. We have our first volunteer.
Scott, come on down.
Ooh. All right, I'm clicking on the first name, Daniel. Ooh. Did it work? Is he here? Did it happen?
I don't see him.
I don't see him either. All right, Caroline.
Hello.
Hello.
Yes. Am I on the air?
You are.
You are.
Excellent.
You are live. You're live with Jordan and Rebecca.
Yeah, I can't help but hear your stories and think of a time where, yeah, we really, I think, had underestimated this. And actually the group that we were working with also underestimated it. And the pushback, so basically it was a replatforming thing. They were trying to do some consolidation and kind of tried to work in some easy wins. And there was one group in particular that was known would probably really struggle the most with making the change. And, you know, it was, of course, it's new technology, but it's also new appearance, a new brand. And that can be a very personal thing. It can feel very personal, whether or not it's intended to. And so it was, basically a bet was kind of made of, we're going to not rock the boat. We're going to not bug these people early on. We'll show some early wins. And then we'll be like, come on board and jump in. And it totally didn't work. Right? It didn't work at all. It was like, I don't know if you've ever had the experience of physically leading a horse or a mule that decides suddenly it doesn't want to go. And you can just tell, you just know. And it was really that kind of scenario. And it, same thing. It resulted in, the thing that gave was the technology side of it. It ended up being a much more complicated solution. Ended up having to sort of give up on the dream of that. And actually what's happened, interestingly, is that group has become the leaders of it. Like, they really have ended up leading the charge. And so, I think it was interesting. We were managed as a liability. And there might've been a chance there to manage them as okay, you're hard and you're challenging, but you're also passionate. Maybe the what if that, of course, who knows how well that goes is, maybe we could have leveraged that as a force for positive change instead of resistance.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. Sounds like you guys had identified them as stakeholders, but maybe the strategy or tactic taken to engage them, didn't end up working. They were sort of like, I think you said, viewed as a liability, when sort of now you look at them and they really could have been champions, and maybe are now champions of the project.
Yeah. And I guess the only other thing I think that was a lesson for me from that was avoidance is a strategy. You might think it's not one, but it is, and maybe evaluate if that's actually the strategy that's, doing nothing is still a choice. It's still an action. So,
right.
Fine.
Cool.
Awesome.
Thank you, Caroline. All right. I'm going to forcibly eject you, and Rolando, you are up.
Hey, everybody.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, hello.
Good. So we've had an ongoing issue with a client where they wanted to transform their old site and their old setup using like a normal, server to moving to the cloud and having a new Drupal site. And the CEO, which is obviously one of the most important shareholders, is super excited, really wants to go ahead. But there's a couple of shareholders that are part of the IT department. And during the whole discovery process, they've been figuring out that going to the cloud, moving to Drupal, is actually going to take away most of their work, most of their job. Like, it's going to make their job not needed, let's say. And so they've been fighting the whole move, even though the CEO wants it, and coming up with like ridiculous excuses of why this is bad and why this won't work for the company, even though in the end it's literally they're trying to save the job, right? Which is in a really uncomfortable position for us, right? Because we're trying to do right by the client. We want to make sure they have everything they need and move them over to the cloud and whatever you want to call it. But it's really hard because you keep battling all these small things, and you have one set of shareholders that are super happy, and then the other set of shareholders that are just fighting on everything, on everything we throw their way. And there comes a moment where you kind of want to say, hey, like, maybe we should just focus on this, or just focus on these positive shareholders, because these guys are just dragging us down. It's been quite an experience. Like we've things that should take like a week have taken months because we keep answering the same questions, the same concerns over and over again, and it's been really bad. It's been really bad because they're trying to save their jobs basically at this point.
Right. Out of curiosity, you mentioned the one group that is maybe sort of resistant to this change a little bit more than the champion group. Is this a marketing, the age-old conflict of a marketing versus IT situation?
It might be. I think they're really accustomed to having like full access and full control to their infrastructure because they had an on-premise server, and moving them to any of the cloud hosting providers does not give them the same amount of access to them to that. So that's their first worry. But in the end, if it's not really a worry, it's just like a change of mindset, right? It's doing something different, but at the same time, that it makes their position and they're not needed as much, so it becomes an issue for them. So it's funny. I've never when you're in the shareholder meeting, most of the time people they want to advance, they want to something new. They might disagree on how to get to that, but everybody's kind of on the same page. With this particular client, it's kind of horrible because you're kind of like in the middle of a war between doing nothing and staying on the on-premise hosting, and then the CEO and a couple of other shareholders do want to do something new, do want to change, want something better. So you're trying to wage this war. You're trying to not hurt any people. You're trying not to call out people, right? Because it'd be really easy for us to say, the only reason you're being this negative is because you're going to lose your job, but you can't say that as well. So it's a really tough position to be in the middle of.
Yeah, I can feel that.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. I
Sure
think
thing.
as I'm monitoring the chat, a lot of people kind of relating and expressing themselves being in a very similar situation. So I
Thank you, Rolando.
Thank you. I think thank you, Caroline and Rolando, for sharing really awesome stories.
I think Daniel is back.
Daniel's back.
Hey, it worked. You must have still been in the queue. All right, welcome back.
I'll defer if you guys are going to go ahead and continue on. It's fine.
I think in the interest of time, because we have till 11, right, Jordan?
No problem.
We will have more time for
till
Q&A
11.
and discussion at the end. This is not the end. And also, please follow up with Jordan and I afterwards if we don't get to you.
No worries, guys.
Yeah,
Great conversation.
sorry to miss you. Bye. Thank you.
Okay.
All right.
So I think we heard, while Caroline and Rolando's stories were a little bit different, I think we heard some similar themes as to like what are some of like the big issues that come up as part of like people issues when we have these sort of big projects or change, right? And the first big issue that we've run into a lot is in these stakeholder sort of managing stakeholders and managing change is just too many cooks in the kitchen, right? Too many people with the sort of same voice or sort of like same volume of voice, right? And some people are saying go in this direction, some people are saying going in this direction. This can lead to, timeline and scope creep of our projects. I think Rolando was talking about that, like things just taking longer. This can lead to difficulty getting stakeholders together just and lengthy meetings, like in the same place, especially now, right? And just lengthy meetings, a meeting that should take, 15 minutes taking an hour, right? Time wasting in general because you're resolving conflict or trying to like figure out how feedback, like kind of, where it meets in the middle or whose feedback is, really the direction we want to go in, potentially like duplication of efforts, confusion on who's doing what, multiple rounds of amends or in cost increases. And really it's our job as part of these projects to prevent that 50-person meeting from happening or even 10-person meeting from happening. And we're going to talk a little bit later here about a tool and technique we have that can help you prevent too many cooks in the kitchen.
Yeah. Rebecca mentioned people sort of moving in different directions. Even with a smaller group, you might sometimes have competing goals. There's a favorite saying of mine is that people behave how they're measured. And when different groups on a project, different stakeholders are measured on and motivated by different things, it can be really hard to get everybody aligned, right? The IT team has different KPIs than the marketing team or the design team or the content team, or they're out to save their jobs, and another set of stakeholders is out to move the company in a forward direction and save money, right? But they all have to work together to make this thing work or to make your project really scale and be successful. And often different stakeholders aren't even using the same language, much less having the same goals. So this, again, can lead to everybody kind of moving in different directions, but they think they're moving in the same direction, or maybe even pushing their own agendas, or treating work like a zero-sum game, right? If you win this thing, I'm going to lose out on something. And there are tools you can use to try to move past that. But because we all know that for these, especially when you're doing something new, it really requires everybody to be on the same page and collaborating together to be effective.
Right. And in the spirit of collaboration, right, we all know that collaboration requires compromise, right? And for us, that means dealing with and handling egos, right? Egos can lead to infighting on project teams, people pulling rank for political rather than user-centered or metric-centered reasons. And we should be making our decisions based on data and what research tells us, not because, you know, we've got the highest paid person in the room. It can lead to biased feedback, aggressive, potentially controlling behavior, or just making changes, you know, to simply make a mark, right? To say, well, I at least, you know, did this, you know, made this one comment and it was taken. And it can lead to obstruction. Egos can lead to obstruction and go slows.
And finally, fear. Not finally, excuse me, but almost finally. Fear, right? Show of digital hands. How about this? Chime in on the chat if your last project that involved other people went perfectly. I'm going to assume that nobody is writing right now. Mine certainly haven't. And an issue that we often see is that people are bringing their baggage to your project, right? Just like relationships. People bring the baggage from their last relationship to the next one. They are going to bring their emotional baggage to their next project. Everything from their last project, they're going to bring with them, and often that means in that bag they are bringing fear. And there's plenty of fears to choose from, right? When you're doing something new, there's the fear of change, there's the fear of upsetting the leadership, there's the fear of loss, right? And I'll talk more about that on the next slide, but fear of losing the control or the job or the power that you have now, fear of something you don't even understand maybe, right? For example, we work with personalization a lot with our clients, and we have clients in marketing who are reading article after article saying, you know, oh, if you're not personalizing, you're leaving money on the table. And their bosses are reading those articles too, and they come to them and they say, why aren't we personalizing? And the real answer might be, we don't really know how to do that. Like, we're not quite sure what that means at the moment. We're not even really sure what's involved, but that could be a really scary thing to say. So that fear, like the global wellness brand I told the story about at the beginning, that fear can lead to some really bad decision making, and it's all around us. So this leads, oh yes, this leads into premature partying, which is also a problem. Sort of the flip side of fear is this excitement about the new. Right? People love in leadership, they see as part of their job to get people excited about the new thing that is coming next. But often they do that before they've acknowledged what's come before. Bree Groff, who's a principal at a firm called SY Partners, has a great article about the grief that comes with change, especially at work. And it's even harder at work because at work we don't often use words like grief. But the fact is that change means loss. And she talks about several types of loss that people face when things change. There's loss of control, loss of pride, loss of time, loss of narrative, loss of your job, maybe. And if that loss is not acknowledged by leadership, if they're just out there saying, oh man, things are going to be so great after we move to the cloud and fire the IT team, they are going to encounter serious resistance. So before you celebrate the thing that's coming, before you start partying about the thing that's on the horizon, you have to take time to acknowledge the loss of what came, because otherwise it will drive really fear-based decision making, and people will not be willing to come on this journey with you.
So we've shared some war stories and talked about some common people problems. Now we want to share with you some actual tools and tactics that we've had success with when faced with these problems with our client and really within even our own organization. And we'll start with a deep dive into one of the tools Phase 2 is already using today. You may be familiar with it in maybe a different context. But that is stakeholder mapping. And stakeholder mapping, we pull from, UX, design thinking, project management. It's an innovation framework. And it's the process that helps you identify, prioritize, and strategize around an organization's stakeholders. sometimes we do, like from a UX perspective, we do stakeholder mapping for external users. This is really more internal project-facing stakeholder mapping. And so the first step in stakeholder mapping is to generate a list of your stakeholders, to identify them. On whom will this project have the biggest impact? Who needs to be actively involved? And really classify them into sort of like across three sort of categories, which we call impact, influence, and interest. So impact is who will be impacted by our work or by our project, whose day-to-day demands will change, right? I'm thinking of Rolando's story about IT, right? Who is going to be accountable for the results of this project? So that's impact. Then we talk about influence. So who can wield influence over our work? Who has the ability to greenlight our project or to get us more funding? Conversely, who could just kill this project? Who has that trump card that says, hey, this is done, like you know, no more money, we're pulling the plug on this? That's influence. And then we talk about interest. I actually noticed Andre was talking about the difference between, I think it was influence and interest. This is where who is interested in our work? Who can be a champion, a sponsor of our work? And who might be a naysayer or detractor? And so I'm going to use hopefully many of you have seen this TV show, but if not, I think we can roll with it. So I'm going to use Mad Men as an example for our stakeholders, right? So here we are, Sterling Cooper, and we're going to take the role of Ken Cosgrove, the guy in the pink circle. He is an account director. He's not the head of account. He's not at the bottom level, but he's sort of in the middle. And what Ken Cosgrove wants to do is he wants to start up a personalization practice or capability within Sterling Cooper. And what he does first is he generates a list of his stakeholders. So many of the people you see here in this picture, right? And if we go to the next slide, you'll see he creates a matrix, right, of stakeholders on the left, and then impact, influence, and interest. And what Ken does is he ranks them. He ranks them on a scale of 0 to 5 in terms of their impact, influence, and interest. Next slide, please. Okay, and he gets scores, right? He totals these numbers and he gets scores across these three different categories, and then he gets ratings associated with them. So then he sorts them by score, which is the next slide. Okay, great. Sorry, there's a little bit of a lag. All right. So what I think is super interesting, and if you understand the show Mad Men a little bit, is that what you'll see at the top here is the scoring, right? Is some of the principles of the company, like your Roger Sterling's, who has his name on the company, Sterling and Cooper, are actually at the bottom, right? And then like Peggy Olson, copywriter, right, is at the top, right? And there's reasons for that, right? It's because, Roger Sterling may score really strongly when it comes to influence, but he really, doesn't really have, his day-to-day isn't impacted by, starting up a personalization practice. He's more of a martinis and steaks guy, right? Like the booze, the smoozing the clients, right? And his interest, again, he's more about clients. He's not making clients happy. He's not really into the nitty gritty of actually getting work done. But Peggy Olson, on the other hand, if you think about personalization, that's going to drastically change the demands of her from a day-to-day basis, right? She has some influence, right? She's pretty tight with Don, right? She's pretty tight with Joan, right? But she has some, and then her interest, right? If you think about the future of my job, I'm sort of, preparing for the future. I'm trying to learn new skills, pretty high, right? So, can Peggy kill the project? Probably not. But figure out how to incorporate her into the project and bring her along with us through the process. So then what we're going to do is, with our sort of rankings, we're going to take sort of another sort of view of our stakeholders, right? And think about how are we going to manage them? How are we going to develop, like, what's our cadence going to be with communicating with them? How closely do we need to manage them, right? And we're going to map our stakeholders, our MadMen stakeholders to this. And what you're going to see is kind of interesting. Next slide, please. There we go. Thank you. Okay. So hopefully you guys can see this okay. So what we're going to see is a few things here. So one is the top two quadrants are where we're going to focus most of our energy on, right? Because these are where we need to like bring our champions, our sponsors, the people who can, you know, kill this project, who can be advocates for it. This is who we're going to manage most closely. And these four people are Don Draper, right? They're Bert Cooper, Joan Holloway, can't remember her last name, and Lane Price, right? And interestingly enough, there's some people who sort of aren't in this like highly managed area, right? Like we had Peggy, who we talked about, right? Like she's there, like she's gonna be, you know, we're gonna give her assignments, we're gonna keep her up to date. We're probably having more like daily touch bases with Peggy, when we really sort of focus our efforts on like who can fund this project, who can kill it, who can say, hey, we got to make this happen. These four in here are who we want to monitor and steward most closely. Another tactic or a step you can take is to map there, and you can sort of hard to see here, but on the left are the stakeholders, the Jones, the Don Drapers, and kind of map what you think their stance is on your project currently. Is it negative? Is it positive? Who might you need to shift from negative to positive or neutral to accomplish and keep the project on track? And ultimately what these activities do is generate a stakeholder action plan, which is on the next slide. It's a resulting list of actions and tasks, but it's also specific strategies and assigning specific people on your project team to work and communicate with your stakeholders. So for instance, Ken, who's sort of our lead project person, is going to, is assigned to Peggy, Harry, Peggy and Harry because they're kind of the more closely knit core team, and they're going to be working on establishing the practice, figuring out sort of the process, the nitty gritty piece, right? But Ken is going to assign certain stakeholders to Peggy, right? Like Peggy has a close relationship with Joan, right? She's probably best to manage Joan to focus on and to communicate with her in the cadence and fashion that she will, and on the talking points that Joan really wants to hear about. The same thing with Don, right? Peggy has a close relationship with Don. She can keep him up to date. She can bring him in when he's needed. And then Ken and Harry will sort of round out who gets assigned. You could also see in here specific engagement strategies. So for instance, you know, Roger Sterling probably, you know, not interested in attending like a Scrum meeting, right? Or having like a formalized meeting. Ken is going to keep him up to date by taking him out to lunch and having martinis and sort of talking about things, right? Bert Cooper and Lane Price, they're going to come to the table with sort of more financial sort of data points and supporting points. Bert Cooper is probably also more interested in sort of legacy, like where is this personalization project going to take the firm from a legacy perspective? So let's talk a little bit more about strategies, some of specific strategies for handling stakeholders.
All right, thank you, Rebecca. So enroll people early and often is a huge one for me. Once you've got your map, or even before your map, if you even just have your list, I would say that's the time to start your enrollment activities. And this is a part of projects that tends to get overlooked, but a lot of people are going to be impacted by the things that you're doing. And enrollment is the name of the game. Your goal is to show your colleagues and the other people who are impacted that this project is going to be an exciting opportunity for them, even though it will also be a challenge to the way that they're used to operating. Doesn't mean to party prematurely, but it does mean to start to get them on board with you as soon as you can. The specific way you enroll each stakeholder is going to be unique to them, as Rebecca just showed in her MadMen example. But if you can begin by acknowledging the loss, for example, of what came before, or acknowledging the contributions, right? That IT team that Rolando was telling us about before, I wonder if anyone has acknowledged all the great work they've done that got us to the point where we are now, where we can even begin to think about moving to the cloud, right? This is a big change for them. And if you can start by getting them on board a little bit, you will find the resistance begins to slip away. Give people a place to air their fears. Make it an okay conversation to say, I'm afraid I'm going to lose my job after this, or I'm afraid my skills are not going to be valuable after this change. Give them a place to air those so they're not carrying them around with them, and that will help alleviate some of the fear-driven decision-making. Those can be difficult conversations, but I think they have a real value. And if you can help people understand where they fit into the new vision of the future and how what you're doing builds on their work and how their work has had a big impact, most people will start to get on board with you. Bring in your critics, co-opt your critics. Even a great initiative will have its critics. Give them a job to do. Invite them into your process, right? Like Rebecca has given Peggy and Harry specific assignments in the stakeholder map. Make them a part of this. Interview them as a subject matter expert. People love to be a subject matter expert. This can go a long way towards that ego problem. Let them feel heard. Give them a place to air their concerns, their grievances. Put them at the table. Doesn't mean you're going to listen to or do everything they say, and you might not even successfully enroll everybody, but you should try to engage those high influencers and the highly impacted from your stakeholder map, even if they really disagree with what you're doing. Yeah. Because if you don't give them a place at your table, they will go to another table and start talking.
Yeah, returning to our Mad Men example, Pete Campbell kind of falls in this category, right? Is like, you know, he sort of a very hateful character in the show, right? But you know, he's in that monitor section, right? Because while Pete really doesn't, at least, you know, at the beginning of the show, I won't ruin the show for you, doesn't hold a lot of power, right? He can still sort of, you know, poke at things and like start rumors. And so you want to, you know, keep him informed. You want to talk to him about what's in this for him, right? And, you know, you can't just forget about him, right? Like he could pose trouble down the road if you don't manage him correctly.
Yeah, I want to take a moment just to acknowledge that there's a question in the chat from Michael about this would be great for an internal change, but what about when you're dealing with a client and you don't necessarily know where everybody sits on their side? And so I'm seeing some good answers in the chat about, you know, interview sort of a trusted stakeholder at the beginning. I think it can be really helpful to bring a client stakeholder with you into this process of kind of mapping, like help us understand, you know, hey, what's the IT team's role in all of this? Are they going to be concerned? And we like to start those conversations early on in a project, before people have a chance to really start to dig their heels in. But sometimes you just have to make your best guess and proceed anyway, which I think is still better than not doing it. In the interest of time, I'm going to keep moving on. Get transparent. Nothing really breeds resistance quite as much as when people feel like they don't know what you're up to, right? Collaborate on your goals with the wider group so people feel like they have a little skin in the game. This can help surface and alleviate this competing goals problem. You know, hey, here's what we're trying to get out of this. What are you trying to get out of this? Be open about your progress. If you're running experiments, right, use them to generate interest in the work that you're doing and to focus on what you're learning from each one. Be open about your failures and your successes. Acknowledge competing priorities when they surface. Talk openly about them. Again, that's sort of a big theme for me, and these conversations can be challenging, but if you can model that vulnerability yourself, right? Here's what we're trying to get out of it. Here's what we're afraid of in this project. That can get the other people involved to also be willing to air the things that are on their minds about this. And that can really go a long way towards building trust. Report out regularly, ask for input. Again, not a promise that you're going to use all of the input that you hear, but the fact that you're asking and listening can really make people feel better about the work that you're doing and make them less likely to try to resist your efforts. Finally, psychological safety. It's a favorite term of mine. It's coined by Amy Edmondson back in 1999, and she says, psychological safety is not about being nice. It's about giving candid feedback, openly admitting mistakes, and learning from each other. And it has been shown to be a key component of teams that are able to take risks together and react flexibly to change. There's a great book called The Culture Code, which I highly recommend if you're interested in this topic, about how high-performing teams build this sort of key foundational aspect. It's not about being friends with everybody. It's not about spilling your guts to everybody, but it's about creating an environment where people feel safe trying new things, where they don't feel like they're going to get punished for failure. It does rely on being vulnerable. It relies on empathy. But these are really valuable skills when you're working with other people. And personally, I think that whoever called these things soft skills never tried to use them at work, because it's not as easy as it sounds.
Awesome. So we wanted to save some time, although we don't have a ton of time for discussion, but I think we're curious to understand, what have your experiences been with any of the topics we've talked about here today? Is anyone doing stakeholder mapping and having success or, struggling with it? Are there things you would add to our list of people problems or strategies for handling the people part of your projects?
And you can use, hit that request audio video share if you'd like to share, or you can throw something in the chat.
Sean says he's using a RACI matrix. Interesting. Sean, obviously that helps you across the sort of RACI part of it, but I'm curious, are you sort of taking it any steps further in terms of, assigning, sort of similar to the chart we showed of assigning certain people to, steward other either internal or client stakeholders, or even getting down to specific strategies of hey, we're going to communicate on this cadence and talk about, focus our conversations on, metrics or research? Not yet, but that's a great idea. Awesome. Happy to spark ideas.
I see a question from Jen. What's the threshold, the size of a project, where you determine if a project's big enough or too small to warrant stakeholder mapping?
I would say this is a good exercise to do across big or small projects. I think it really gives you a lot of insight into how you're going to communicate, how to structure your communication, can be informed to help with project planning, or sort of cadence of reviews and feedback. So, I think big or small, and again, I think it doesn't have to be, getting to your stakeholder mapping doesn't have to be something that is sort of cumbersome or lengthy, right? You can probably get at it, on a smaller project in an hour or two, right? And I should also note that your stakeholder mapping will probably evolve with you over the course of the project as you, start to implement your strategies and communication plans, or as you start to shift someone from neutral to positive, or negative to neutral. You're going to want to adjust it. So it's a living and breathing document.
Gang, we are just about at time. I want to say a couple things. We'll try to hit another question or two if we can. Several people have asked about the slides. I'm sorry we didn't have a link available already, but we will get one out to you as soon as possible. And we would also ask, I think Tanisha has just put a link in the chat here, that if you enjoyed this, or even if you didn't, please take a minute to fill out the survey, so we can get some feedback on this, so that DrupalCon can continue to improve. Let's see, we have maybe 60 seconds. Should we grab one more question from the chat? Are you ever worried about the stakeholder mapping document getting in the hands of the stakeholders and they get offended?
Yes. So look, you have to, I think this came up in relation to how do you build this map? Is this, to Michael's question, do you involve your client in stakeholder mapping? And I think, the answer is probably not, sort of, it depends, right? I think you have to sort of really think about who you want to share this map with and who's going to really be involved in it. We've definitely worked on projects where we have stakeholder maps that we've done in tandem with maybe the core project team. But yeah, you have to be very strategic and really think about who's going to have access to this.
Somebody asked about language, like what language can you use to get people to talk about their emotions and that sort of thing in a business context, and the idea of maybe using like risk management as a framework. I think that's great. The Culture Code, that book I referenced, also has some good info on how you do it. And I'd say a great first step is to kind of model the vulnerability yourself, right? At a project kickoff, we like to talk about, here's what we're concerned about might go wrong here. What are you concerned about?
Yeah.
It's a small thing. It kind of models the behavior that you're looking for.
Yeah, I think one of the things we've started doing with a lot of clients is I forget what you're calling it, Jordan, the pre-mortem?
Yes, the pre-mortem. What can go wrong?
Right.
Yeah, we do an exercise exactly at the beginning of a project where we talk about, okay, let's say it's 6 months from now and this thing has been a miserable failure. How did we get here? What are all the things that we failed to do or failed to see? Who did we not involve? Who should have been at the table that wasn't? Who was resistant that we didn't think they were going to be? That could be a really valuable exercise. Anything else?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
I guess
I know there were other. Go ahead, Rebecca.
Yeah, I know there were a few other questions. I think we got to them. I think, you know, since we're at time and I know there's other sessions and we want to be respectful to them, you know, thank you so much for joining us today. You know, please take time to fill out the survey, like Jordan said, for our session. We greatly appreciate your feedback and thoughts. And please feel free to reach out to us on LinkedIn or throughout the course of DrupalCon. We're here.
Be around. Happy to talk. And thank you all for joining us and for sharing your story. Bye, everybody. I don't know how to end the session.
Maybe just leave?
All right. I'm going to go. Bye, gang. Thank you all so much. Aw.